Hey everybody, I'm Shane Thomas. Welcome to the second video edition of Upstream Ag Insights. Last week was the first one, got a lot of good feedback, so thanks everybody for sharing your thoughts and some comments. And this week trying to incorporate some of those, such as having the video of myself along with some of the slides incorporated. We'll look at transcript stuff, we'll look at subtitles, and we'll look at kind of an entry sort of sound bit or sound bite as well too. So thanks again to everybody for listening and checking it out, sending your feedback. It actually got more views than I anticipated, about 450. So we'll keep trying some different things, and hopefully it helps people that prefer to consume information and what's going on in the ag industry via audio or video. It helps them take in Upstream. So the other thing is this is also the 100th edition of the written version of Upstream. So really excited about that, and thanks everybody for the continued support, reading, sharing, feedback. Been awesome for me to learn a bunch about the ag industry, to learn about technology, and to meet just a bunch of amazing people that know a ton, and just has been an unbelievable experience for me. So thanks everybody again for that. With that, we'll get into the topics. I'm going to try and keep it a little shorter this week and focus in on 2 stories instead of 3 or kind of 4 in a bit. And so with that, going to touch on what I wrote about this week in ag retail or influence erosion, which you've probably seen written by me in the past. I've alluded to it, I've touched on it, but I've never actually expanded on all the different aspects of it, just to help everybody understand how I think about influence erosion, what it is, why it's important, and what you can do about it at the end of the day. And then the last part that we'll touch on quickly is the FBN and Environmental Defense Fund launched call it Green Lending pilot program this week, which I think is pretty exciting. I think it's pretty cool. So we'll talk a little bit about that. With that, we'll get into the influence erosion aspect. And so really, what is influence erosion? And the way I look at it is from an ag retail perspective, a lot of the ways that you derive loyalty, margin, sales, and just ultimately create a strong, sound business is by having an influential relationship with your customers, having a strong relationship that leads to influence with your customers. And over the last, I would say, call it decade, I kind of use a 15-year time horizon in what I put together. But over the last decade, we've really seen a ton of different, call it entry level companies or entrances of organizations, tactics by suppliers, and just a bunch of different things when it comes to the digitization. So the internet, social media, YouTube, those sorts of things have really all came in to really impact where information can be accessed by farmers and by their hired people, that sort of thing. And so to really start and frame this up, I used Porter's 5 forces model. And Michael Porter was a Harvard Business School professor, and he came up with this 5 forces model to really highlight and understand the competitive dynamics of an industry. And so I applied this framework to ag retail. I wrote a piece on this a couple of years ago now. And really kind of go through these 5 forces and how, whether they're high, medium, or low in ag retail. And we tend to see them being pretty high. And so I'll go through those quickly, where you have the threat of new entrants, which maybe isn't as high in a general sense. There's a lot of capital that needs to get put into the average ag retail with a chem shed, with a fertilizer shed, with the actual application assets or equipment, all those sorts of things, people. But we are seeing more digital groups come in, or call it unique suppliers. And FBN is a good example. Meristem Ag maybe is another one out of the US that people are familiar with, that groups coming in with a different angle. Then you have the bargaining power of suppliers. And we know that has continued to, I would say, increase in terms of the power the suppliers have. They've consolidated. So now they have products clear across, call it every single intervention across a crop or input for a farmer. They're larger. They have more access to information. They also have been spending more on marketing, and there's more angles to be able to influence farmers from that perspective, but primarily from a bargaining power with the retail and the manufacturer. Really see that consolidation giving them a lot more influence and power from that perspective. And so we move into the threat of substitute of products, and really there's not a lot of differentiation between a lot of retails. And so you have a substitute that can be obtained from another retail down the street. Now there's more offerings of, call it VR services, maybe it's credit services, maybe it's some other entirely type of scouting service from an independent consultant, for example. So there's a lot more substitutes coming up. So also very high. And then you have the bargaining power of buyers, which is the farmer. So you now have, call it larger farmers, where if all of a sudden one of them doesn't take action in their 5,000 acres or their 6,000 acres, that's a big loss, when that might have been 3 farmers 25 years ago or something along those lines. And so that really contributes to the competitive dynamic. And then you have the just rivalry amongst existing competitors already pretty high. There's only one really selling cycle throughout a year. If you don't execute on getting that product on farm, you're sitting on that product for an entire year, eating into you either have to send it back to a distribution warehouse or to a manufacturer warehouse. You either have to sit on it with your capital tied up. So there's also a really high existing amount of competition amongst traditional competitors. And so you look at every single one of these and they're at least medium, if not high, from a ag retail perspective. So you have a really challenging environment to begin with. And so when we look at influence erosion, and when we look at where we started from, I really just tried to illustrate this with a couple images. And so I picked 2007, 15 years ago. Really, you could probably have chosen 2011, 2012, or 2000. Things didn't change that much in that time frame. You started to see social media and the internet and that sort of thing come in. But really, if you go back to 2007, when a farmer wanted information, when they wanted to learn about a crop production practice, a crop input, or anything along those lines, so where to get credit, they were going to their ag retail, going down 10 miles, whatever it might be, down the road to their retail, having coffee, having that conversation. And that was really where you got the majority of your information. There wasn't as many crop input manufacturer reps around. There wasn't the ease of access to them via social media or their contact information. And really, you had a small number of independent consultants at that point too. So there wasn't as high a number as we see today in 2022. And then you had some government extension, which again, it's still more challenging to reach them 15 years ago. Social media, Twitter was just being founded, wasn't mainstream or big yet. YouTube, none of that was really around for people to access stuff. So you needed to go to the retail to get information. And this is really where a lot of the pricing power came from, was being able to be that trusted source of information. And I still think the retail is, but now there's just more options, or a proliferation of options. And so we have seen that really change. And what I've done to illustrate that is highlighted some of the new entrants here. And so we fast forward to 2022, and we can see that you have equipment dealerships getting into services. You have all the online information. You have more independent consultants. You have the groups like FBN. You have ag tech companies. You have a real big increase in the number of staff and initiatives done by the manufacturing companies, easier access to government extension. Then you have larger, savvier farmers today that are looking for more. And so you almost look at it as a maze that these farmers have to get to the retail. So by the time they get to the retail to purchase a product, if there isn't a strong relationship and a lot of influence there already, the retail is really playing defense, if you want to call it that. They're really trying, instead of starting from the core message to the farmer, they're really trying to take what that farmer is already thinking, already has been told, and trying to manage their offering within that. And so that puts you in a defensive sort of situation. That's why we see loyalty decrease. That's why we've seen margins decline. And I think that's because of the erosion of influence at the retail level. And so I'll dive into these a little bit deeper without explaining super in depth. I wrote this up, so if you want to dive deeper, I go into even more topics within the article. But you start to look at the options for manufacturers to do direct marketing via Google, Facebook, those sorts of things. So now you have more touch points for the manufacturer to really influence the farmer. They have more staff. So not only do they have more grower reps that are going out and establishing a direct relationship with the farmer and influencing them, they also have more technical people that are also doing more trialing, doing more information acquisition that can then get disseminated out to farmers in a more effective way via direct marketing. And so you see this kind of work together, whereas the retail was the group in 2007 doing a lot of the trials and supporting the information about what products work, what products don't work. That narrative is now shifted more towards the manufacturers being able to influence that more specifically. Then we have the farm and manufacturer consolidation, kind of touched on that already, but we have more manufacturer programs. So this really influences how the farmer has to, or sorry, how the retail has to go about having a conversation with the farmer. They have to navigate these programs that are tighter, that influence their margin. So that really challenges them. And then you have the information asymmetry declining. And what I mean by that is really, if you look at 2007, if you wanted information, like I alluded to, you had to go to the retail, whether it's for pricing, whether it's for how products work. That was kind of the core aspect. Whereas if you look now, you have FBN for pricing, you have YouTube to get information, you have endless online conferences where you can get information. And so it's everywhere. Really, the challenge is being able to filter through that in an effective way. But that's where increased consultants and precision companies have helped to go through that, filter that, help farmers understand what's going on and pay for that, $4 an acre, $6 an acre, whatever that is, which really has, again, that was bundled in with the retail before. Now the information has been unbundled in a way versus having that all bundled together. And then we have digital agronomy systems. So your climate field views, granulars, just as an example. Not only is it another touch point for the manufacturers to have a conversation with the farmer, but it's more staff to be able to touch the farmer with. And it's also more information for them to make, call it forecasting decisions, call it conversation decisions, call it marketing decisions. All these different things get fed into by some of these agronomy systems. And then we even have things like risk management tools where you have parametric insurance. You have Corteva partnering with Parametrics, Ag or GARS in Canada, for example. You have AgriClimb with Syngenta. And this is really another aspect of a program, but it's enabling more information to the manufacturer to understand where their products being applied, when are they being applied, what fields, what was used there last year. There's a lot of different things that can start to be learned. And that's, again, another touch point. And then even distribution. And again, this is more of a Canadian thing for anybody outside listening. But you have the Bayers and BASFs who actually have now vertically integrated into the distribution function, which gives them more influence of where products go, gives them a better understanding of where products are needed. And again, this is really stemming from there's more information flowing elsewhere versus directly to the retail. And so this really begins to change the dynamic of margin, relationships, loyalty, all of that. And that's really what I think we've seen happen in ag retail over the last decade or 15 years sort of thing. And, there's a number of ways to begin to get around this, and I'll get into those on the next slide. But quickly, there's things that keep us from really progressing forward too. And I'm big into the human psychology, cognitive biases. And so I try to identify different biases that we need to overcome in ag retail to really push beyond where we're at and try to do things that are going to support the better relationships, more influence moving forward. And so 3 of those are really the sunk cost fallacy is one. And so we've heard a lot about that. Probably microeconomics is very common. But when you think about that outside of economics and into strategy investments or asset investments, where you have an individual that's an executive or in a leadership position, and they made that decision to invest in a certain way of doing things. And it's tough to change direction. It's tough to say, hey, we do need a digital aspect. Hey, we do need to change how we interact with our manufacturers or with our farmers, because you get so caught up in how things were and what you've done in the past and what you've built your strategy around before. And that leads into the status quo bias, where we get really stuck in the way we like the way things were or are. We don't like change. We're humans. It's natural. And so it's something that is comfortable, that we don't want to push forward to change the way we look at things, because it's really hard. It's not easy to do. Not many people thrive in that situation. And so overcoming that status quo bias and saying, hey, do I think that this is the right way of managing my relationship with the farmer? Or is there a better way now with new information, new tools, new systems, and new dynamics going on in the marketplace? And then you have the not invented here bias. And this is really stemming from, we like to try to come up with the ideas ourselves always. People always think their idea is better than somebody else's. And so what I mean by that is there's all these external, call it outside industry thoughts around how can we improve or manage this. And we get stuck in the ag is different, ag retail is different, and 100% it is. There's a lot of things that are very different and nuanced within ag retail versus say traditional retail or say some other direct to consumer type of business. But there's a lot of things that we can learn from and try and really to push things ahead. And there's a quote that I really like, and I know a lot of retails have been burned by trying some of the new things because digital technology didn't work or some of these digital systems didn't work. And this isn't really necessarily about digital or precision or anything at all. It's just that those are some of the tools that can help support. But it's not small failures that lead to, it's not small failures that lead to the decline of a business. It's sustained mediocrity. And so just continually doing the same thing because it worked in the past or it works good enough, that can be the surer path to decline than trying a couple different things in a smart, strategic way. And so I think that's a really compelling quote to think about. And then to really overcome this, to me, a lot of it comes down to, I mean, there's tons of options. Quite frankly, I get into more in depth in the write-up itself, but really it comes down to how do I as a retail have better information about my customers? How do I acquire that information and leverage that information and equip my staff to use that information so that they can regain some of that influence? They can stay ahead and be proactive instead of constantly in a reactive state where the farmer's coming to you, asking what the questions, you're getting ahead and having those conversations. And again, this is not to say every retail is in that situation. This is kind of a broad brush generalization. But when you start to look at some of the investments that can be deployed in portals, when it can be looked at some of the information to look at how do we better understand what sort of disease might be coming? How do we understand what sort of insects might be coming? And there's some 3 to 5 year technologies out there that might be interesting. But even today, you have very basic spore testing that can be done. And so, you look at some of this that's a disease example just for clarity in crops, but you start to look at some of these capabilities. How do I, as a retail, get better information about my customers to support their decisions, inform them, and make their farm more profitable? I think is fundamentally where a lot of these services stem from. And so I think that's really key, and really just having better conversations with the customer too, and understanding those customer needs. And so I elaborate on some of that in the newsletter itself. And so I think with that's really kind of the core of influence erosion and how we are seeing a lot of really dynamic changes within the ag marketplace landscape. And I think there's going to constantly need to be a focus on trying new things to really stay ahead of it and make sure that margins aren't continually declining, loyalty isn't continually declining, and there's other ways to continually remain and be exceptionally relevant to the customer. With that, we'll move over to the FBN and Sustainable Lending quickly. And really, FBN partnered with the Environmental Defense Fund, I believe, and it's just a pilot. And so it's really small actually. And I think they're only going to be able to access lend money to 40 customers or something along those lines, 40 growers. So very small, but I find it really compelling from an FBN perspective in that they're really starting to get into the green lending side of things and support farmers from a green lending perspective, which I touched on in the 2022 outlook, is something I'd be watching and thinking a lot about, because I think that is something we will see a lot more of. And it's really one of those things that helps farmers get paid for data, for doing the right thing. And so I'll elaborate on that in the sense of participating growers in this pilot with FBN can apply for loans and effectively get 0.5% rebate when they meet these sustainability practices or targets that are tailored to each farm. And we'll get into that in a second too. But I think the way to view these is really these are rebates viewed as rebates or payments for data, because you're sharing what you're doing on your farm to access that lower cost of capital. And so more information is shared. This allows the financial institutions to de-risk their lending because they can be confident in what's being done, how it's being done, when it's being done. So that's beneficial to them. And so the farmer sharing this is really a data exchange. And so this is another way for a farmer to get paid for data in a way. And I've talked about that in the sense of, the data can be associated with an actual output. So whether that's yield, whether that's with the soil execution being done, or whether it's being associated with lending, there's more ways to get paid for data, so to speak, than just saying, hey, my data is worth $5 an acre and somebody should buy it off me, which I hear a lot from farmers, or something along those lines is kind of what you'll hear. And so this is really starting to put a price on data in a roundabout way, and really starts to tie in the digital aspect, the finance and sustainability aspect. And so it's really, really interesting. And so that's where you get into, well, how do you define sustainability? And to me, sustainability, it's not a destination, it's a process. And I think this is where what FBN is doing is really smart too, where, they're customizing sustainability standards for each farm based on data collected via the gradable management platform, which again, I think that's a great start. I think that's smart for them. And really it's key aspect in my mind to moving the sustainability conversation forward, if that is what is valued by, call it, end users of the grains, or consumers, whoever you want to point it at. I think we're not going to get to a specific definition, but we can start to look at it as a process, and it's a continuum. And really what this continuum is informed by data and verification of these practices, and given a sort of score, so to speak, that can help you understand how this field is doing. Because you're always going to get into instances in farming where, if we truly do need to make sure that we are feeding the world, of course, we need to make sure that there's actual grains being pulled off the fields. And sometimes you have to till as a farmer. There's going to be situations where you might not be able to get the corn in, you might not be able to get your canola in, whatever crop, if you do not go and till some of the land to make sure that there's an ability to actually plant because it's too wet, or there's too much trash from the year before, something along those lines, or a number of other things too. And so I really think this is a cool initiative from FBN. And I think I haven't talked to anybody there, but judging from what was in the release, I think it seems like it's being approached in a really smart way. So looking forward to hearing more about that. In general, there was actually quite a bit of fintech announcements this week. So another thing that wanted to watch this year, and I think we're just on the cusp of seeing more talk, more implementation, a lot of pilots and things being tried out. Last couple things. My friend Matt Pryor from Tenacious Ventures put together. He's in the 30 for 30, which is writing every single day, and he's had some really cool write-ups. They're like 250, 300 words, and so really quick. But one was really highlighting this image where it's how a ag tech company moves from the attention to the actual reputation, and how do you actually build a successful business and get through that messy middle. And so I kind of throw in some of my comments of, well, what is the messy middle? How do you get through it? And I think a lot of that is being relevant to your customers, understanding them, identifying a way to add value, finding that product market fit, business model fit, and really just being attuned to what they're doing. So I think that's a cool part of Upstream this week. And then also talking about computer-generated decision-making, as well as challenges with scaling soil tech. So last week I highlighted the Stennen Group, and then listened to a podcast also from the Tenacious Group on with Adam Little from Sound Agriculture. And I thought it was a great podcast that he put together, or that he spoke about on the podcast, and some of the challenges he talked about were scaling soil technology in a previous life of his. And so pretty cool bits of information, I think, happening in ag this week. And so hopefully you'll check out the written version. And on top of that, if you have suggestions on what else I can do from a video perspective, trying to make sure this doesn't get too long, so I can't get into every single thing. But if maybe there's a desire for that, maybe I can look at different angles to support that. So thanks again for checking out the video version of Upstream. Hopefully you'll give the written version a skim as well, and see what else is in there. And other than that, Hope you all have a great week, and thanks again for tuning in.